Choice modeling is a younger alternative to contingent valuation and nowadays a more popular one. So essentially you ask your respondents to choose between a number of discrete alternatives. You assume that the value of a good or service is a function of characteristics, and those characteristics come as a bundle. And you ask your respondents to choose between alternative options, and those alternatives vary in their characteristics. That includes the price, because that is one of the main things you're interested in, and it also includes differences in environmental quality, because that's the other main thing they're interested in. And then the choices that your respondents make involve trade-offs. You do not present them with options that are both cheaper and better for the environment, because then there's very little to choose. And then you infer the willingness to pay from the choices made. You do not ask for the willingness to pay directly, but it's inferred. And that is what you do all the time. When you go to the supermarket, you see these things. This is an example. When you go to Amazon to buy a new mobile phone, you're presented with, in this case, 4 options, and that's because I clipped the graphic, with phones that look different, have different shapes. This one is longer, this one is shorter, come at different prices, come with different customer ratings, have different memory and different processing power, and that is how you make your choice typically. And contingent choice or choice modeling follows exactly this particular format. Here's an example of a contingent choice study where people were asked, what do you think about wind power? This is renewables. Would you like wave power or offshore wind or onshore wind? Come at different costs. To electricity has different impact on wildlife, where onshore wind is negative, wave power is negative, offshore wind is more positive and would be deployed in different locations in Scotland. And then you are asked to make your choice. Which of these 3 alternatives do you like most? But also, just as in the supermarket, or if you go and shop for a new mobile phone, you can say, well, I stick with what I have. It's maybe nothing, or maybe my old mobile phone. And you can also tick the box, I don't like any of these. Now, one such choice doesn't tell you a whole lot, so you also ask people for a second or a third or a fourth round where the attributes are different, and prices here, for instance, are different between this scenario and this scenario, 80-80-40, 0-80-80, and you ask people, and if this is your choice set, which of the 3 would you prefer, or would you rather walk away? And you take people through a series of such choices. The way this looks is as follows. You define a set of attributes: distance from shore, increased cost of electricity, wildlife impact, location, 4 attributes in this case. You present people with a number of options or alternatives: wave, offshore winds, onshore winds. You of course label them. You need to define the levels of the attributes per option, and it's important to always include a status quo option. This is of course not what the respondents see. This is not what the interviewees get in front of them. They see this, right? This is what the analyst has in mind. This is what the respondent sees. Is this better? A good thing about choice modeling is that you're talking about bundles of attributes, so it's multidimensional change. It's not, you do not reduce things to a single dimension. That allows you, with clever statistics, to infer the willingness to pay, also for options that you did not ask about, because essentially you can recombine the attributes and the level of the attributes to see what people would have responded had they been shown yet another alternative. You do not, unlike contingent valuation, where it's very much focused on the price, the price here is more hidden, so you get fewer protest votes if people do not like contingent valuation or do not like environmental valuation as a principle because they're against marketization, they're against capitalism. With choice modeling, that focus is not there so much, and therefore you attract fewer protest votes. Another good thing, I think, is that choice modeling is much like you would do on the market. And I started with this example of buying a mobile phone on Amazon. This is what you do all the time. This is how you make choices about buying whatever, be it a mobile phone or a box of cereals or insurance. This is what the market presents to you, and choice modeling essentially mimics that familiar situation that you see on the market all the time. And therefore you have less of a hypothetical bias. People are less estranged by this type of question. And because it's not the case that somebody walks up to you and asks you for your willingness to pay for something, and therefore you immediately have a tendency to say yes if you're a yay-sayer. No, you're just being asked to make a choice, and it's very unclear what the analyst thinks about this. From this particular example, it is clear that the analyst has some sort of interest in renewable energy, but it's not at all clear whether the analyst would prefer offshore wind over onshore wind. That is just, you cannot deduce that from the format. So there is less of a confirmation bias, or less of a trying to impress the interviewer, if that be the case, or of course the opposite. So these are all reasons why choice modeling nowadays is more popular than contingent valuation. There is, it's not without its problems. There is a bit of a cognitive burden for respondents that you're being asked to look at a fairly complex situation, and it means that you're asking something from your respondents, perhaps more, and therefore they may not make the effort that you think they should make. And that can lead to satisficing or to heuristics. And one of the things that may happen is that, particularly in this design, the wildlife impact is small, and people may just overlook that. It's a design issue, but also a cognitive issue, that people say, well, there's 4 things I need to think about. Perhaps I want to reduce it to 3. And it may also be that people just say, okay, I live in this part of Scotland, so I'm going to choose one of these 2. I'm going to focus in on one of the 4 attributes and just going to make my decisions based on that particular attribute, and I'm going to ignore the wildlife impact, I'm going to ignore the cost, and I'm just going to zoom in on one particular aspect. And those things happen, and that's a drawback of this method. Another drawback, I think is not particularly relevant, is that it's harder to do. You need to think harder about your design as a researcher. What you need to do is that your set of alternatives and your set of attributes and the level of those attributes are informative. So you need to make sure that every possible combination of attributes and levels is represented in your survey, one, and then of course that is easy, you just do every permutation. But the problem with that is that you then exhaust your respondents because you have a very long survey. So somehow you need to sort of split your sample such that every permutation is seen by somebody in a meaningful combination with another set of options and levels. So there's a bit of an issue there with a clever statistical design so that actually all your responses are informative without having overly long surveys and without having overly big samples. But that is a technical issue, and that is why people train in statistics. So yes, it's more complex, but that is of course not a reason not to do it. It's just a reason to work harder. The study is set up in, or if you want to do such a study, you essentially follow the same steps as you do in a contingent valuation, where instead of a survey design, how would you ask the question? You go for a payment letter and so on and so forth. You need to worry about the attributes and the levels and construct the choice sets. But other than that, it's basically the same. The analysis is different than in a contingent valuation. It's much more like a travel cost model, where in this case you would use not the zonal travel cost model because that would be entirely inappropriate, but you would follow the analysis that you would use in a random utility model. So the econometrics is known and feasible.